My name is Yvette Loring, and I am 63 years old. These hands, wrinkled and scarred, have picked more cotton than I care to remember. These eyes have seen things no soul should witness. But today, as I sit in this small room with pen and paper, luxuries I once could only dream of, I feel compelled to tell you my story. Not for pity, but so you might understand what it means to rise when the world insists you stay on your knees. It was August of 1862 in the sweltering heat of Mississippi. The plantation stretched as far as the eye could see, rows upon rows of cotton under a merciless sun. I had been born into bondage, as had my mother before me, and her mother before her. By 63, my body bore the evidence of decades of forced labor, my back permanently bent, my fingers twisted from years of work that began before dawn and ended long after dusk. Master Caldwell's plantation was known throughout the county as one of the harshest. He was a man in his 40s with cold gray eyes that looked through us as if we were nothing more than livestock. His wife had passed 2 years prior, leaving him bitter and cruel, his anger finding easy targets in those of us who had no power to resist. That morning began like any other. I was in the main house, scrubbing the wooden floors of the dining room. My knees ached against the hard surface, but I had learned long ago not to show pain. Weakness invited punishment. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room I had cleaned thousands of times before. I heard his boots before I saw him, heavy, deliberate steps that made my heart quicken with instinctive fear. Master Caldwell entered, smelling of whiskey, though it was barely past breakfast. He stood over me, and I kept my eyes down, focused on the soapy water and the worn brush in my hands. "Yvette," he said, his voice thick with contempt, "look at me when I'm speaking to you." I raised my eyes slowly, carefully keeping my expression neutral. Years of survival had taught me to hide every emotion, to become invisible even when standing in plain sight. "Yes, Master Caldwell," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my stomach. He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "Do you know what your purpose is, Yvette? Do you understand why you exist?" I remained silent, knowing that any answer could be the wrong one. He leaned down, his face close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You were born to serve me, to serve people like me. That's all you'll ever be, all you were meant to be. You understand that, don't you?" The words were not new. I had heard variations of them my entire life. But something about that moment, perhaps it was my age, perhaps it was the accumulation of 63 years of such cruelty, something inside me shifted. A small flame of defiance that I had carefully guarded my entire life suddenly burned brighter. "I understand what you believe, Master Caldwell," I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I understand what you believe to be true," I repeated, choosing each word with precision. "But believing something doesn't make it so." The slap came fast, snapping my head to the side. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek, but I didn't cry out. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You dare speak to me that way?" His voice rose, fury coloring his features. "You forget your place, old woman." "I know exactly what my place is," I said, meeting his eyes directly now. "I've known it every day of my 63 years. But my place and my worth are not the same thing. What possessed me to speak such words, I cannot fully explain. Perhaps it was the knowledge that I had lived long enough, survived enough, that even death held less terror than living one more day in complete submission. Perhaps it was simply that I had reached my limit, that invisible line we all have, beyond which we cannot be pushed without breaking or fighting back. Master Caldwell's face turned crimson. He raised his hand again, but this time I didn't flinch. I simply looked at him, and in that look was every ounce of dignity I had preserved through decades of degradation. "You will regret this," he hissed. "Tomorrow you'll learn what happens to those who forget their place." He stormed out, leaving me alone in the dining room with my bleeding mouth and racing heart. I returned to scrubbing the floor, but my hands trembled now. What had I done? In 63 years, I had survived by being careful, by never drawing attention, by swallowing every indignity with silent endurance. And now, in one moment of weakness, or was it strength, I had jeopardized everything. That night, in the small cabin I shared with 3 other women, I lay awake on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. The others slept fitfully around me, their breathing punctuated by occasional whimpers, the soundtrack of trauma that never fully released us, even in sleep. I thought about my mother, who had died when I was 12, worn out by labor and grief. I thought about my sister, sold away when she was 15, whose face I could barely remember now. I thought about all the people I had loved and lost, all the dreams I had been forced to bury, all the pieces of myself I had hidden away to survive. And I thought about tomorrow and what Master Caldwell's threat might mean. But beneath the fear, that small flame of defiance still burned. I had spoken truth to power, perhaps for the first time in my life. Whatever came next, I would face it as Yvette Loring, not as property, not as a servant, but as a human being with dignity and worth. The night stretched long before dawn would come. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. I rose before the bell, my body protesting every movement. Sleep had come in brief, fitful intervals, my mind too active with worry and strange, unfamiliar hope. The other women in the cabin stirred as I dressed in my worn work dress, the same one I had worn for 3 years, mended so many times that more thread than original fabric held it together. "You be careful today, Yvette," whispered Sarah, a woman 20 years my junior who slept in the corner. "Word spread about yesterday. Caldwell's been drinking heavy all night." I nodded, appreciating her concern. We looked after each other when we could, small kindnesses that made survival possible. "I'll be careful," I promised, though we both knew careful might not be enough. The main house loomed before me in the early morning light, its white columns stark against the darkening sky. My assignment today was the library, a room Master Caldwell rarely used but insisted be kept pristine. I gathered my cleaning supplies and made my way through the servants' entrance, my heart beating steadily despite my anxiety. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the previous evening, after our confrontation, Master Caldwell had received an unexpected visitor. Colonel James Mitchell, a Union officer whose regiment was moving through the area, had arrived seeking shelter and information. The war had turned, slowly but surely, and men like Caldwell could no longer ignore the changing tide. I was dusting the shelves when I heard voices in the hallway, Master Caldwell's and another man's, unfamiliar and authoritative. I continued working, trying to make myself invisible as I always did. But something made me pause when I heard my name. "The woman you mentioned last night," the stranger's voice said. "The older one who spoke back to you. I'd like to meet her." My blood ran cold. Master Caldwell's response was sharp, defensive. "She's nothing, Colonel Mitchell. An old woman who's forgotten her place. I'll deal with her appropriately. Nevertheless, I'd like to speak with her." Footsteps approached, and I straightened, preparing myself for whatever was to come. The library door opened, and Master Caldwell entered, followed by a tall man in a Union uniform. The officer's face was weathered, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read, not contempt, not pity, but something closer to curiosity. "This is Yvette," Master Caldwell said dismissively. "As I said, she's—" "I'd like to hear from her directly, if you don't mind," Colonel Mitchell interrupted. He turned to me fully. "Yvette, is it? How long have you been here?" I glanced at Master Caldwell, uncertain if answering was permitted. The officer noticed my hesitation. "You may speak freely," he said gently. "I want to hear your story." And so I told him. Not everything. 63 years cannot be compressed into a single conversation, but enough. I told him about being born on this plantation, about my mother and sister, about the decades of labor without rest or compensation. I spoke carefully, factually, but the truth of it needed no embellishment. The facts alone were damning enough. Master Caldwell's face grew redder with each word I spoke. "This is inappropriate, Colonel. These are matters of private property and—" "Private property?" Colonel Mitchell's voice took on an edge. "Mr. Caldwell, surely you're aware of President Lincoln's proclamation? As of January 1st of last year, all enslaved persons in rebellious states are declared free." The room fell silent. I had heard whispers of the proclamation, rumors that spread through the cabins like wildfire, but Master Caldwell had dismissed it as Northern propaganda, insisting nothing had changed and nothing would. "This is Mississippi, Colonel," Caldwell said through clenched teeth. "Those northern laws don't apply here." "On the contrary," Mitchell replied, his voice calm but firm. "They apply everywhere the Union Army has jurisdiction, and as of 3 days ago, this county is under Union control." He turned back to me. "Yvette, you are a free woman. You have been free for over a year and a half, whether anyone acknowledged it or not." The words didn't immediately register. Free. The concept was so foreign, so impossible, that my mind couldn't grasp it. I looked at Master Caldwell, whose face had gone from red to pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You can't just come into a man's home and—" "I can, and I have," Colonel Mitchell said. "Furthermore, based on what I've observed here and reports from other plantations in this area, I'm recommending this property be placed under military oversight. Your treatment of these people, Mr. Caldwell, is unconscionable even by the standards of this barbaric institution." What happened next, I will remember until my dying day. Master Caldwell, the man who had lorded over me and hundreds of others with absolute authority, the man who had just yesterday told me I was born to serve him, suddenly found himself facing consequences for the first time in his life. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer to him, and despite being roughly the same height, the officer's presence seemed to tower over the plantation master. "You will gather all the people you have held in bondage and inform them of their freedom. You will provide them with resources to leave if they choose, or fair wages if they choose to stay, and you will do so immediately." "I will not," Caldwell began, but Mitchell cut him off. "You will, or you will be arrested for crimes against humanity and held for military tribunal. The choice is yours." The silence that followed was profound. I watched, barely breathing, as Master Caldwell's entire world shifted beneath his feet. The power he had wielded so casually, so cruelly, was suddenly stripped away. His shoulders sagged, his face crumpled, and for the first time in my 63 years, I saw him as what he truly was. Not a powerful master, but a small, frightened man whose entire identity was built on the subjugation of others. Colonel Mitchell turned to me again, his expression softening. "Yvette, this man owes you an apology at minimum. He owes you far more than that. Years of your life, compensation for your labor, justice for what you've endured. But we'll start with acknowledgement." He looked pointedly at Master Caldwell. "Well?" Master Caldwell, though I suppose I could no longer call him that, stood frozen in the library, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate every line of anger and humiliation on his face. Colonel Mitchell waited, his expression patient but unyielding. Caldwell's voice came out strangled. "You cannot expect." "I can, and I do," Mitchell replied. "This woman has spent 63 years in bondage on your property. Yesterday, you told her she was born to serve you. Today, you will acknowledge her humanity and her freedom. Speak." I stood there, my cleaning rag still clutched in my hands, trying to comprehend what was happening. In all my years, I had dreamed of freedom in abstract ways, as something distant and impossible, like imagining flying or breathing underwater. But this, standing in this room while Master Caldwell struggled to form words of apology, felt surreal. The silence stretched. Through the windows, I could hear the morning sounds of the plantation. The bell that would normally call us to the fields, voices of the overseer shouting orders, the routine machinery of bondage continuing on, unaware that everything had changed. Finally, Caldwell spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I apologize." "Look at her," Mitchell commanded. "Address her directly, by name, and speak clearly." Caldwell's jaw tightened. I could see the war happening inside him, pride fighting against survival, decades of assumed superiority battling the reality of his current powerlessness. Slowly, reluctantly, he raised his eyes to meet mine. "Yvette," he said, and hearing my name from his lips without "girl" or some other diminishment attached, felt strange. "I apologize for what I said yesterday." "And for what else?" Mitchell pressed. "Colonel, surely this is sufficient." "For what else, Mr. Caldwell?" The plantation master's hands trembled at his sides. A vein pulsed in his temple. When he spoke again, the words came out like they were being physically torn from him. For the years of forced labor, for the treatment you received, for, he paused, swallowing hard, for treating you as property rather than as a human being. The words hung in the air. They were inadequate, laughably, tragically inadequate considering what they attempted to address. How do you apologize for 6 decades of stolen life? How do you express remorse for a crime so vast it defies comprehension? But still, hearing them spoken aloud by the man who had embodied my oppression for so many years created something I can only describe as a crack in reality, a fundamental shift in the order of the world as I had always known it. Yvette, Colonel Mitchell turned to me, his voice gentle. Is there anything you wish to say? I looked at Caldwell, really looked at him, and saw something I had never seen before. He was afraid, not just of the colonel or the army or the consequences he might face, but of something deeper. He was afraid of insignificance, of being revealed as ordinary, of losing the illusion of superiority that had defined his entire existence. I wish to say, I began, my voice stronger than I expected, that I forgive you, Master Caldwell. I saw surprise flash across both men's faces, not because what you did was forgivable, but because I will not carry the weight of hatred into my freedom. I survived 63 years by protecting something inside me that you could never touch, and I will not let you take that from me now. I stepped closer to him, and instinctively he took a step back. The reversal was not lost on any of us. But forgiveness is not forgetting, I continued. What happened here? What you did to me and to every person you held in bondage? That must be remembered. That must be acknowledged. Because if we forget, if we pretend it never happened or wasn't as bad as it was, then we betray everyone who suffered, everyone who died, everyone who never got to see this day. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. You told me I was born to serve you, but I was born to be free, just like you were. The difference is, I had to fight for my humanity every single day, while you took yours for granted. And in that fight, I became stronger than you will ever be. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. Master Caldwell looked away, unable to hold my gaze any longer. Mr. Caldwell, Mitchell said, you will now gather everyone on this plantation and inform them of their freedom. Yvette will accompany us to ensure your words are truthful and complete. If you refuse or attempt to mislead them, I will have you arrested immediately. Am I clear? Yes, Caldwell whispered. Yes, what? A long pause, then almost inaudible. Yes, Colonel Mitchell. We walked out of the library, the colonel first, then me, then Caldwell following behind. The symbolic reversal of our positions was not lost on me. My legs felt weak, my mind struggling to process the enormity of what had just occurred. As we made our way through the house toward the front entrance, I saw other enslaved people pausing in their work, watching with wide eyes and confused expressions. Sarah was in the hallway, carrying linens. When she saw us, she froze, her eyes meeting mine with questions she dared not voice. It's all right, I told her softly as we passed. Everything's going to be all right. Outside, the plantation bell began to ring. Not the usual wake-up call or work signal, but an irregular, urgent pattern that meant everyone was to gather immediately. As we walked down the front steps, those same steps I had been forbidden to use for 63 years, always required to use the servants' entrance. I felt the morning sun on my face. Free, I thought. The words still felt foreign, impossible. But with each step down those forbidden stairs, with the warm Mississippi sun on my skin and Colonel Mitchell's authoritative presence beside me, it began to feel slightly more real. People began emerging from the fields, from the cabins, from the various work areas around the plantation. Confused, frightened faces looked toward the main house where we stood. There were about 80 people total, men, women, children, ranging from infants to old folks like me who had somehow survived into their later years. Master Caldwell stood on the top step, elevated above everyone as he had always been, but now with Colonel Mitchell's hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was both supportive and controlling, ensuring he would say what needed to be said. And as the crowd gathered, as familiar faces looked up at us with fear and hope and confusion mingling in their expressions, I prepared to witness what I had never thought I would live to see, the moment when everything changed. The morning sun climbed higher as the last of the workers gathered in front of the main house. 80 souls. Some I had known my entire life, others who had arrived more recently through purchase or inheritance. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. The elderly leaned on younger relatives for support. Everyone wore the same expression of anxious uncertainty. The gathering of everyone at an unusual time rarely meant anything good. I stood beside Colonel Mitchell, positioned between him and Master Caldwell in a way that felt both empowering and terrifying. My heart pounded so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. Sarah caught my eye from the crowd and mouthed, "What's happening?" I could only shake my head slightly, not trusting myself to respond. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "My name is Colonel James Mitchell of the United States Army. As of 3 days ago, this county has come under Union control. I am here to inform you of certain facts that have been deliberately withheld from you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The overseer, a cruel man named Harper, who had wielded the whip more times than I could count, stood off to the side, his expression dark and resentful. "On January 1st, 1863, Mitchell continued, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all enslaved persons in rebellious states to be forever free. That was over a year and a half ago. You have been free since that day, whether you were told or not." The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone, I think it was young Thomas, who worked in the stables, let out a choked sob. The sound broke the dam, and suddenly, voices rose in confusion, disbelief, hope, and fear all mingled together. "Silence," Mitchell called out, not harshly, but with authority. The crowd quieted. "I know this news is overwhelming. I know you have questions. But first, Mr. Caldwell here has something he needs to say to all of you." He turned, fixing the plantation master with a hard stare. "Don't you, Mr. Caldwell?" Caldwell looked out at the assembled people, his former property, his workforce, the foundation of his wealth and status, and I could see him struggling with the words. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "You are," he began, then stopped, cleared his throat, started again. "You are free to go. The proclamation that the colonel mentioned, it's real. You're no longer bound here." "Tell them the whole truth," Mitchell prompted. "Tell them about the wages they're owed for their labor. Tell them about the compensation they deserve." Caldwell's jaw clenched. "The Union Army is arranging for compensation for labor performed after the proclamation date. If you choose to stay and work, you will receive fair wages going forward. If you choose to leave, you will be provided with basic supplies to help you begin your new lives." The murmur grew louder. I saw faces I had known for decades transforming before my eyes, fear giving way to cautious hope, disbelief struggling with the possibility of truth. Old James, who was even older than me at 72, fell to his knees and began weeping. His daughter rushed to support him, tears streaming down her own face. Colonel Mitchell raised his hand for attention again. "I want to be honest with you all. Freedom is your right, but the road ahead will not be easy. The war continues. Resources are limited. Some of you may choose to stay here and work for wages while you figure out your next steps. Others may wish to leave immediately. Both choices are valid, and both are yours to make." He gestured to me. "This woman, Yvette Loring, spoke truth to power yesterday when she refused to accept the lie that she was born to serve. Her courage helped bring about this moment. I ask that you listen to what she has to say." All eyes turned to me. 80 faces, young and old, looking to me for guidance in a moment that defied comprehension. My mouth went dry. What wisdom did I have to offer? I was just an old woman who had survived through caution and silence, who had only yesterday found the voice to speak up. But they were waiting, so I spoke. "I don't have all the answers," I began, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "I'm just as shocked as you are, just as uncertain about what comes next. But I know this. We have survived horrors that should have broken us, yet here we stand. We have protected our humanity through the darkest of times. We have loved and hoped and endured when endurance seemed impossible. I paused, looking at the faces before me. At Sarah, who had shown me kindness. At Thomas, barely 18, his whole life suddenly full of possibility. At the mothers holding their children, realizing those children might actually have a future. Freedom is our birthright, I continued. It always was, even when it was denied to us. But claiming that freedom, living that freedom, that's going to require courage. Some of us may need to stay here temporarily while we gather resources. Some may want to leave immediately to find family who were sold away. Some may not know what they want yet, and that's all right too. I looked directly at Master Caldwell, who stood with his head slightly bowed. But whatever we choose it. Not because we're told to, not because we're forced to, but because we are free people making free choices. My voice broke on the last words, emotion finally overwhelming me. Sarah broke from the crowd and rushed forward, embracing me tightly. Then others followed. People I had worked beside for decades. People whose pain I had shared, whose small joys I had celebrated in the darkness of our cabins. Colonel Mitchell allowed the moment to continue for several minutes before clearing his throat. I will be stationed here for the next week to ensure the transition happens fairly and peacefully. Anyone who wishes to leave will receive a letter of passage and basic supplies. Those who choose to stay will have their wages and working conditions documented and enforced. Mr. Caldwell, you will provide a full accounting of all assets and resources. Caldwell nodded stiffly, his entire bearing that of a defeated man. The week that followed the announcement was unlike anything I had experienced in my 63 years. The plantation, which had operated with such rigid, cruel order for so long, transformed into something chaotic and alive with possibility. Some people left immediately, young men mostly, eager to join the Union Army or search for family members sold away years ago. Others stayed, uncertain where else to go, but the quality of our staying had fundamentally changed. We were no longer enslaved people working under threat of punishment. We were free people choosing our next steps. Colonel Mitchell established his temporary headquarters in the main house, much to Master Caldwell's evident discomfort. The plantation master had retreated into his private quarters, emerging only when summoned for accounting meetings or to sign documents. The overseer, Harper, had disappeared in the night after the announcement, apparently unwilling to face the people he had brutalized now that he no longer had power over them. I found myself in an unexpected position. People sought me out for advice, treating me as an elder with wisdom to share. Me, Yvette Loring, who had spent most of her life trying to be invisible. Colonel Mitchell also consulted with me frequently, asking about conditions on the plantation, about who might need special assistance, about the history of the place and its people. "You're a natural leader," he told me on the third day, as we sat in the library, that same room where everything had changed. I was sitting in a chair now, not scrubbing the floor. The reversal still felt surreal. "I'm just an old woman who's survived too long," I replied. "No," he said firmly. "You're a woman who preserved her dignity and humanity through unimaginable circumstances. That takes extraordinary strength. People recognize that." On the fourth day, we held a meeting to discuss the plantation's future. About 40 people had chosen to stay, at least temporarily. We gathered not in front of the main house, but inside it, in the large dining room where I had been scrubbing floors just days earlier. Master Caldwell was required to attend, sitting in the corner while we discussed what to do with his property. "The land could be divided among those who wish to farm," suggested Marcus, a strong young man of 30 who had been a field worker. "We know how to work it better than anyone." "But we'd need resources," added Elizabeth, a woman in her 40s with 3 children. "Seeds, tools, animals. We'd need capital to start." Colonel Mitchell nodded. "The Union Army is working on programs to help formerly enslaved people transition to independence. It's complicated, and it will take time, but there are resources available. Land redistribution is being discussed at the highest levels." "What about him?" Sarah pointed at Master Caldwell. "He profited from our labor for decades. Where's the justice in him keeping everything while we start with nothing?" It was a valid question, one that hung heavy in the room. Mitchell addressed it carefully. "The legal questions around property and compensation are complex. I can't promise you perfect justice. The systems aren't in place for that yet. But I can promise that Mr. Caldwell will not be allowed to continue as he did before. His labor force is gone. His overseer fled. His power dissolved. Whatever he keeps as a diminished man. I looked at Caldwell then. He sat slumped in his chair, looking older than his 40-some years. He had lost weight in just a few days, his face gaunt and drawn. When he noticed me looking, he quickly averted his eyes. The man who used to command my gaze now couldn't meet it. I don't need his ruin, I said quietly. I need our rebuilding. Mitchell smiled slightly. Wise words, Yvette, which brings me to a proposal I wanted to discuss with all of you. He stood, addressing the room. The Union Army needs local liaisons, people who understand the communities here and can help implement Reconstruction policies fairly. Yvette, I'd like to recommend you for such a position. It would come with a salary and authority to help distribute resources to formerly enslaved people in this county. The room erupted in supportive murmurs. I sat frozen, overwhelmed. A position? Authority? A salary? These concepts were so foreign to my experience that I struggled to process them. I don't know how to read or write, I admitted, shame coloring my voice despite myself. Then we'll teach you, Mitchell said simply. You have intelligence, judgment, and the trust of your community. The rest can be learned. Sarah grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. Say yes, Yvette. You'd be perfect. I looked around the room at faces that had become more than fellow survivors. We were becoming a community, a family bound not by bondage, but by shared experience and hope for the future. Young Thomas grinned at me encouragingly. Elizabeth nodded. Marcus called out, You've already been leading us, Miss Yvette. Might as well make it official. Miss Yvette. Not just Yvette, but Miss Yvette. The title of respect brought tears to my eyes. I'll do it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, I'll do it. The room filled with applause and cheers. Even Colonel Mitchell smiled broadly. Only Master Caldwell remained silent in his corner, a ghost haunting the house that had once been his kingdom. That evening, I stood on the porch of my cabin, which was now truly mine, not just a place I was assigned to sleep. The sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, painting the cotton fields in colors that almost made them beautiful. Sarah joined me, bringing 2 cups of real coffee that Mitchell had shared from Army supplies. Can you believe it? She asked, settling beside me. A week ago, we were enslaved. Now you're going to be working for the government, helping our people. I still don't quite believe it, I admitted. I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream. It's real, Sarah assured me. And you deserve it, Yvette. Everything you're getting, everything good that's coming, you deserve it after what you've endured. I sipped the coffee, savoring the warmth and richness. I keep thinking about my mother, I said softly. About my sister. About everyone who didn't live to see this day. They deserved it too. They did, Sarah agreed. And maybe the best way to honor them is to build something good with the freedom they never got to have. We sat in companionable silence as darkness fell. 2 free women contemplating a future that was uncertain, but finally, truly ours to shape. 3 months had passed since that August morning when Colonel Mitchell walked into the library and changed everything. It was now November, and the Mississippi air had turned crisp with the promise of winter. I sat at a desk, my desk, in a small office in the county courthouse, reviewing applications for resource distribution. Learning to read had been harder than anything I'd ever done. At 63, my eyes weren't what they used to be, and my mind, trained for decades to focus only on physical labor, struggled with the abstract symbols on the page. But I was determined. Every evening, Sarah and a young schoolteacher named Robert, who had come down from Pennsylvania with the Union forces, worked with me. Slowly, painfully, the letters began to make sense. Words formed, meanings emerged. I still wasn't fluent, but I could read simple documents and sign my name. Yvette Loring, written in my own hand rather than marked with an X. That signature felt like its own form of power. My position as community liaison had evolved beyond what Colonel Mitchell originally envisioned. I had become a bridge between the Union administration and the formerly enslaved people scattered across the county. I helped distribute food and supplies, mediated disputes, advised on land claims, and listened to stories of suffering and hope from people who finally had someone in authority who understood their experiences. It was exhausting work. Some days, the weight of everyone's needs and expectations felt crushing, but it was also deeply meaningful in ways I never could have imagined. I was helping to build something new, contributing to a future that was radically different from the past that had shaped me. The plantation had been partially divided. Master Caldwell retained the main house and a small portion of land, but most of the property had been redistributed to formerly enslaved families who wanted to farm. Marcus now worked land that he partially owned, his strong hands planting crops that would benefit him and his family, rather than enriching someone who viewed him as property. Elizabeth and her children lived in a small house on their plot, and she had started a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county. Sarah had chosen a different path. She'd moved to town and opened a small business doing laundry and sewing. Honest work for honest pay, she said, but on her own terms. We still saw each other regularly, and her friendship remained one of my greatest sources of strength. On this particular November afternoon, I was preparing to close the office when a knock came at my door. "Come in," I called, looking up from my papers. The door opened slowly, and Master Caldwell, though I now forced myself to think of him simply as Mr. Caldwell, stepped into my office. He looked even more diminished than the last time I'd seen him, his clothes hanging loose, his hair grayer, his entire bearing that of a broken man. "Miss Loring," he said quietly, "may I have a moment of your time?" Miss Loring. Hearing him address me with that title of respect created a strange feeling in my chest. Not quite satisfaction, not quite discomfort, something more complex. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit." He sat carefully, his hands folded in his lap, and for a long moment, he simply looked at the floor. I waited, having learned that silence could be more powerful than words. "I've been thinking," he finally began, "about what you said that day in the library, about forgiveness not being forgetting, about the importance of remembering what happened." I nodded, but didn't speak. "I wanted to tell you," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "that you were right, about everything. Not just about the proclamation or the laws, but about what I did, what I was." He looked up, meeting my eyes with visible effort. "I built my entire life on a lie, the lie that some people were worth more than others, that I had the right to own human beings, that my comfort justified any amount of suffering inflicted on others." Tears began sliding down his cheeks. "I lost everything, my wealth, my status, my sense of who I was. And in losing it, I've had to confront what I did to you, to everyone, the lives I destroyed, the families I separated, the dignity I stripped away." His voice broke. "I can't sleep anymore, Miss Loring. Every time I close my eyes, I see faces. I hear voices. I remember things I did and wonder how I could have been so cruel." I listened to his confession with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindication. This man who had wielded such power over me, who had told me I was born to serve him, was now broken before me. But another part felt something closer to sorrow. Not for his suffering specifically, but for the waste of it all. The wasted lives, the wasted potential, the wasted years that could never be recovered. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. "Because you're the only person who might understand," he said. "Because you're the one I wronged most directly. Because..." He paused, struggling. "Because I need to know if there's any path forward for someone like me. Any way to atone." I considered his question carefully. The easy answer would be no. That some sins are too great for atonement, that he should suffer as those he oppressed had suffered. But I had meant what I said about forgiveness, about not carrying hatred into freedom. "I can't give you absolution," I told him honestly. "That's not mine to give. What you did affected hundreds of lives, many of whom are no longer here to speak for themselves. But I can tell you this. If you truly want to make amends, then use whatever resources you have left to help rebuild. Donate land, money, influence to helping the people you once oppressed. Spend the rest of your life working to repair a fraction of the damage you caused. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. I've already signed papers transferring more land to the redistribution program. I've set up a fund for education. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. Then keep doing it, I said. And tell your story truthfully when people ask. Don't minimize what slavery was. Don't make excuses. Bear witness to the truth, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. That's how we keep it from happening again. He stood slowly, extending his hand. I looked at it for a moment. That hand that had struck me, that had signed bills of sale for human beings, that had held power it should never have possessed. And then I took it. Not in friendship, not in forgetting, but in acknowledgement that we were both human beings trying to navigate a radically changed world. Thank you, Miss Loring, he said. After he left, I sat alone in my office as twilight deepened outside the windows. I thought about the journey from that August morning to this November evening, from scrubbing floors to sitting at a desk, from being struck for speaking truth to being addressed with respect by the man who had struck me. It wasn't perfect justice. So much had been lost that could never be recovered. So many had suffered who would never see recompense. But it was something. It was change. It was progress, however imperfect. I gathered my papers, put on my shawl, and locked the office door behind me. The evening air was cool and clear, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. As I walked through town, past houses where free families lived, past the school where formerly enslaved children were learning to read, past the church where we gathered not in segregated balconies, but as equals before God, I felt a deep sense of purpose. This was my life's work now, not serving others because I was forced to, but serving my community because I chose to, using my voice, my experience, my hard-won wisdom to help build a world where what happened to me could never happen again. I was 63 years old. I had spent most of my life in bondage, my body marked by decades of forced labor. But I had survived. I had resisted. I had spoken truth when silence was safer. And now, in whatever years remained to me, I would continue to work for justice, for remembrance, for a future worthy of those who hadn't lived to see freedom. The stars grew brighter as full darkness fell. I looked up at them, those same stars that had looked down on me in bondage and now witnessed me in freedom, and felt something I had rarely allowed myself to feel in my life: hope. Not naive hope that ignored the challenges ahead or minimized the suffering that had been endured, but realistic hope grounded in the truth that change was possible, that systems of oppression could be dismantled, that human dignity could persist even in the darkest circumstances. I walked home through the November evening, a free woman in a changing world, carrying the weight of my past and the promise of the future, determined to honor both with every breath, every step, every word. My name is Yvette Loring. I am 63 years old, and this is my story, not of victimhood, but of survival, resistance, and triumph against impossible odds. This is a story of becoming free.